Okay, great.
Okay, so let's just keep that right there for now, and let me just start by saying thank you for being here at our very special VIP breakout session. So this is surfing the trade swell in 2021. So hopefully everybody's at the right VIP breakout, and with our very special guests, Dr. Noel Nasiaba and Cal State University Long Beach, Go Beach, Robert Kleinhanks, who is the economic, I think you said you were a part of the economic research at Cal State University.
There you go.
Yes. And so, so what I'd like to do, I know that we're going to have a hard stop at 1. So we're going to be chatting more in depth with our expert hosts. So just a reminder, this is not a panel, or we don't have any formal remarks, but the beauty of this VIP experience is that we get to focus exclusively on what you want to talk about. So I think before we jump into this, let's just go around the room and have an opportunity for everyone to introduce themselves. So if we can just take a moment, and if you can just share your name and any information about the role that you play in Long Beach recovery. And just to keep things moving, as soon as I see someone, you can raise your hand or in the chat box and ask your question. And so once we get done with the introductions, then we will jump into our questions and introductions after the little presentation that you're going to make, Noel. So with that being said, Christy, I know you were one of the first ones that were in this room. So if you don't mind, I'm starting the introduction.
Sure. I'm Christy Schiller. I currently am the sales executive for Cal Carthage's customs exam station. We're obviously just watching the economic developments very closely, and we're actually seeing a decrease in customs directed exams and an increase in broker driven exams. So we're just trying to understand what the trend is and why customs is choosing to do that when volume is up so high. So we're just listening in to learn.
Thank you, Christy. And I think we have a couple more folks. So I just want to make sure, though, if I don't see, if they don't have their video going, so they're just listeners. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. All right. So with that, then also we'll lock. You want to spend just a second and tell us a little bit, your name and the role that you play in the Long Beach economy?
He might have left.
Okay. All right. So with that, Noel Hasagaba, I will turn that over to you.
Thank you, Council Member, and I appreciate the introduction. And you set the stage very well. And I know the port for you, since your district encompasses the Port of Long Beach, is very important, and we certainly appreciate your support with that. I'm just going to spend a few moments providing a high-level overview of what's happening at the port right now from our vantage point. I know Robert did a great job earlier covering the macroeconomic picture, and what's happening at the ports corresponds very well with that. In addition to what Christy said, what they're seeing from their standpoint. Can everyone see the slide on the screen?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
So many of you who were at the general session heard our executive director, Mario Cordero, mention that we actually ended 2020 with our best year on record, which was a pleasant surprise. If you recall where we were as an economy and as a society in the first half of last year, it was all doom and gloom. And we weren't quite sure at that point when business was going to recover, when the supply chain was going to go back to quote unquote normal. But then in a term of a dime, between the months of May and July, we saw a pivot as manufacturing in China reopened, and they were getting caught up on all the orders that were placed months before. And even though we were faced with health orders here at home because of the pandemic, transactions quickly shifted from services to consumer goods, aided by online shopping. So what we sustained in the second half of the year is a record surge that we're still managing through now. But the story of 2020, really, if you can see on the next slide, is we went from doom and gloom to fast and furious, steep declines, double-digit declines, to a record surge. We went from historic blank sailings, which are canceled ships, to a record number of additional what we call extra loaders in the industry. And that's what we're still seeing now. On the next slide, you'll get a sense of how we fared as a port authority in comparison to some of the other gateways across the U.S. And you'll see that our 8.1 million TEU was far and away the best year-over-year performance of any gateway, including Los Angeles, New York, New Jersey, and some of these other gateways that in recent years have invested aggressively in their infrastructure to try to catch up and take some of the cargo from this market. Again, our hats off to our women and men of the ILWU, our dock workers and our marine terminal operators masked up. They showed up to work. We never had to shut down the port a single day, even through the height of the pandemic. And we're certainly very appreciative of that. Market share continues to be a big concern for us. I mean, if you ask me, what's our target? You know, we were pleased to see the record numbers in 2020, but beyond that, what we're most interested in is market share, because it's our piece of the pie and our ability to attract more cargo that supports the local, regional, and national economy. I know many of you have heard in the past the positive economic impact of the Port of Long Beach in our community. 1 out of 8 jobs is generated by port activity. That's about 500,000 jobs across Southern California, and over 2 million jobs across the nation. I mean, the cargo that crosses our docks touches every single one of the 435 congressional districts. So this is why market share is so important for us. We believe strongly that the port is going to play a huge role in the economic recovery of our city, of our region, our state, and even the nation. So let me just talk briefly on some of the trends that were triggered by the pandemic. You heard me talk a little bit about the sudden shift in cargo. We went from doom and gloom to fast and furious. All the import volume that we've received in recent months has impacted export volumes. There's only so much capacity at the terminals. There's only so much capacity at the port. So the surge in imports has the inadvertent effect of limiting our ability to send goods overseas. And this is important because part of our recovery as an economy, and I know Robert will touch on this as well, has to do with our ability to export, to support our US-based companies in their ability to send their goods overseas. As a result of this impact, we've seen a record number of empty containers being sent overseas. And the reason why for that is because you need those empty containers in Asia in order to fill them with the goods that are eventually going to make their way here to America. I'm going to just touch very, very briefly on some of the key metrics that give us a sense of fluidity and how the supply chain is faring here in Southern California. What you see on the screen is a snapshot of our chassis. And chassis are an essential piece of equipment because they allow our dray companies, our trucking companies, to move containers out of the port. And what you see here is a lot of yellow. We'd like to see a lot more green. And with warehouses and distribution centers fully subscribed as a result of the cargo surge, and also the tightened capacity because of the social distancing and some of the safety protocols introduced by COVID, a lot of these chassis are serving as makeshift temporary warehouses. So you'll see a lot of these chassis parked along the perimeter of some of these warehouses, primarily in the Inland Empire. And on top of that chassis, you'll see a container. And that's the reason why you see so many chassis out on the street, as opposed to having them at the port where they're needed to move containers out. The good news is that our terminal operators are maximizing hours. They're working literally around the clock. First shift, second shift. Our dock workers are showing up. And what you see, all the green there, represents all the gate hours So our port is literally open 24/7, trying to get those containers out as quickly as possible. Turn times is another way we measure our performance and our fluidity. This measures on average how long it takes a truck to either drop off or pick up a load. One of the things that our terminal operators in Long Beach have been doing, which is ahead of the pack in comparison to other gateways, is they're doing a lot more dual transactions. This means that a truck that comes into the port, when they, in the same visit that they pick up an inbound container, they drop off an export container or an empty container. And that's the pinnacle of efficiency. That's what we want to see, because that basically eliminates an additional truck trip. And it basically consolidates two transactions into one. We have terminals today like TTI that are posting 70% dual transaction, and we want to see more and more of our terminals do that. Average dwell time, Christy, to your point about how long a container sits in the terminal, under normal circumstances, it's about 2.5 days. That was the case throughout 2019 and the first couple of months of 2020. These days, it's closer to 5 days. Again, emblematic of what's happening across the supply chain. Warehouses and DCs are fully subscribed. Ships are at anchorage. So containers are spending a little more time on the terminal. Same thing on the rail side. And this brings us to the vessels at anchorage. I know one of the questions that Robert received in follow-up to his presentation is, how long is this going to last in terms of the container ships that are lined up? As you can see here, we have about 21 container ships at anchorage. This number is a little dated. Today, it's closer to about 26. I want to make sure that the audience knows that this is for both ports, LA and Long Beach. About 2/3 applies to LA, 1/3 for us. But still, that number is much higher than normal. People ask us, what's the number under normal circumstances? The answer is 0. But we're working through it, like I said, around the clock. Another common question we get is how long before we see this sea of ships dwindle? The consensus in the industry is the summer months. And a lot of it has to do with the rail. The number one reason why we have so many ships at anchorage is because a lot of the containers on these ships are destined for rail transportation. But the rail system across the nation is backlogged, and they have an equipment balance issue that they're still trying to rectify. The recent weather conditions across the country, if you recall, just a month ago, half the country was covered in snow. That didn't help things for the railroads. But the good news is that the railroads are doing everything that they can. They're moving out shorter trains. Under normal circumstances, they wait for trains to be longer. But in order to help with the backlog, they're moving trains quicker. So we expect this to continue at least through the summer months. And I'll end with that, council member. Certainly want to hear from Robert as well and hear the questions of the group. But I hope this at least gives you all sort of an understanding of what's been happening, what's happening, and what we see in the months ahead.
I wish I had you as my lifeline earlier this morning when I got those questions, Noel. Thanks.
Sure.
Sorry. Go ahead, Cindy.
Yes, no. Noel is absolutely amazing, and we're just so fortunate to have your leadership over at the port. So thank you for that presentation. And so, Robert Kleinhans, what say you about what's happening with this trade swell?
Well, so I call myself a Main Street economist, so I don't look exclusively at the goods movement industry here in Southern California, but I look across all the industries that we have here, not just in Long Beach and Los Angeles County, but throughout the rest of Southern California, how the linkages extend to the state and the nation. And so my observations are as follows. We're expecting here locally as well as across the nation that the economy is going to pick up. And as you may have heard, if you were able to listen to my remarks, so much of that pickup is going to happen on the consumer side of things. Now, if you take a look at consumer spending, now this is at the national level, but over the past year, consumer spending for services tailed off, as you would have expected, because we were unable to go to restaurants. We were not able to go and take trips. All of those are services that we could not consume over the past year. Those fell by about 7%, but purchases of goods increased by about 6% or 7%. I don't remember exactly. But as we move from lockdown to reopening, our consumption of services is going to increase. So it's interesting. We've got this huge surge, this pent-up demand that is giving rise to all those ships that are out there waiting to be unloaded. And at the same time, we're going to see a surge in our demand for services. That means you and I are going to go out to restaurants more frequently. We might go to the movies. We'll schedule a vacation with family or friends. These are all things that are also going to help drive the economy forward. There was an important quote that we heard yesterday from the chairman of the Fed. He said, but you can only go out to dinner in the evening once. So while services will increase, it's a little bit hard to catch up on that side of expenditures, but it's still going to help us get going, and that's going to generate income, which then in turn is going to create a ripple effect that will lead to purchases of additional services and goods downstream, which is going to help our local ports as we buy more goods. I'm fairly optimistic that, well, let me put it this way. So first off, there have been no end to the number of surprises that we've faced, good and bad, throughout the whole pandemic experience. And so a forecast today could easily be revised tomorrow. But I think the consensus right now is that this economy in 2021 is going to be much stronger, perhaps is going to recover so much faster than it had previously been expected to recover. When economists take a look at the current situation, our points of reference are economic downturns that have happened in the past, but those have occurred because of imbalances in the economy. This was due to a singular event, the shutdown brought on by the pandemic. So it's a little bit different animal, and we're in somewhat unfamiliar terrain, just as Noel and others in the goods movement industry happen to be right now, trying to figure out how this is all going to play out. But with each passing day, I would say that my sense of confidence in our recovery and sense of optimism is really growing. And that's a really great message to pass along to everybody. And I think that's going to, bode well for economic activity, for job creation. You may have heard or picked up on the fact that of all the industries that are tracked, major industries that are tracked, transportation and warehousing was the only one that added jobs in year-over-year terms. Every other industry is still lagging, some much more so than others, notably restaurants and other face-to-face industries. So this is certainly a good industry to be in at this time. And we're going to be heaping growth on top of growth. And I'm afraid that many of you in the shipping industry are going to be working extra hours to keep up with everything.
Yes,
You want me
well,
to go on?
No, that's fine. I tell you, it sounds like being an economist is a lot like being a weatherman. We just don't know what's going to happen tomorrow because these are very uncertain times, right?
This is, yeah.
But so how do you and if there's are questions from the panel, please just raise your hand or just put something in the chat box. So when you this is great news that you've given us. So when do you what is your prediction when we're going to be back to normal or back to a healthy spot or a healthy place in our economy? Like what does that look like?
I'll try to make this answer shorter than the last one. I apologize for going on. I get a little bit excited. So back to normal is going to vary depending on where you sit. I think, and so I'm not the health expert, but the expectation is, let's say that by the time we get into the holiday season this fall, we may be able to enjoy our holidays, maybe even our summer, a bit more like the summers of years past, not summer 2020. And so that's really good news. But, when you go to the doctor, your physician checks a number of vital signs to ensure that you're in good health, or if not, to determine what kind of symptoms you have and what the diagnosis might be. We do the same thing in economics. We look at economic activity through the lens of GDP, or gross domestic product, and that has come back strongly. We really expect to see economic activity to recover fully, perhaps by the second quarter or the third quarter, and then take off from there. And also true in California. The labor market, on the other hand, almost always moves more slowly, because as firms move to rehire, as they're getting back on track, they rehire full-time workers a little bit more slowly. They tend to go with part-time workers initially and add to their ranks, and then eventually they turn some of those part-timers into full-timers. That kind of process takes time. And so even as GDP is perhaps putting up impressive numbers, the concern is that the labor market's going to take a bit longer. It will take longer to recover. If the Fed is right, it's going to recover in a matter of months. If we look at historical records, it may take a couple of years at least. Yeah.
All right. And also, I see, Frank, that you have joined us on this. And so would you mind just doing just a really quick introduction and what role you play in the Long Beach economy? There you go. I think, yeah, there you go. I think you're on mute. So Frank, I think you're on mute. No, we still can't hear you. There you go. There you go. We got you. Oh. All right. That sounds better. Let's see. No, we're still, unfortunately, Frank, we're still not hearing you.
Yeah, you may have to switch your audio settings, Frank.
New technology.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not human error, Frank.
Well, Frank, we're sorry, but we can't hear you. So you might have to do, and that might be a setting there on your, so you can just jump right on in as soon as you figure this out. But if there's any questions, like I said, just go in the chat box, and then we can continue to figure those IT. So Mr. Robert, so what industries are going to take the longest? So you'll say this is a 2-year recovery, which I really hope that we are able to get things back together a lot sooner than that. But what industries are going to have the hardest time in this recovery?
The industries that, you can hear me okay, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. The industries that have been a great source of concern over these last several months will continue to be the industries that we need to pay attention to. We all know that restaurants have had a difficult time. Other kinds of sectors that are engaged in what I call face-to-face activity, and they're not necessarily as obvious as you would think, but they do include, the restaurants and personal services that we had to postpone for many, many months, and we're finally able to resume. They're going to be the same industries that take the longest to recover, not just because they need to get back on their feet, but we need to have a comfort level and in returning to those businesses and patronizing those businesses. I've had this described to me as the transition as very similar to adopting new technology. There's some early adopters who couldn't wait to get out there and patronize those restaurants and every place else that was open. Then there are the sort of middle of the road people who aren't the laggers, but they're not the leaders either. And so that's the largest segment of the population that in time, over the course of many weeks, will probably come back. And then the last group, the people who are the last to adopt change are also, I think, we're going to see a similar sort of group of people who will be the last to come back to the restaurants and things like that, out of health concerns, out of legitimate concerns. So those industries are going to take the longest to come back. Many of these other industries that are important to the local economy, like, we don't think about Long Beach as being a community where we have a lot of, say, white collar workers. We're the port town, but we have a significant aerospace sector that has been continuing to put up great things, both literally and figuratively, in the last several months. We have pretty wide-ranging professional and business services and financial services sector that is not fully recovered, but it will in time, and it's doing quite well, and will be a real big anchor for the in a good way for the general economy. So we've got quite a number of industries that are sort of on the way to recover. Then these face-to-face industries are going to be taking a little bit longer.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So, Christy, do you have any questions, or maybe you're good? Okay. All right. And so, listen, I'm going to go back to you. So I do, since there's not any questions, maybe I'll go back to, I'm excited to know that we've been able to increase jobs, and to see all this business, coming into the port. So, and I know we talked a lot about one of your slides says, I think there's 47 container ships sitting out there. Can you maybe talk to me a little bit about like how long they sit there, and knowing that I guess it's not a bad thing that we have this much business, but how are you? So if you could talk about how long they stay out there, and then what that process looks like. And then is the port going to do anything as we ramp up, and knowing that there is a potential for this many ships to arrive, at our docks?
Absolutely, and appreciate the questions. And if I may, just before I answer those questions, to support what Robert said, the other thing that is encouraging for the broader economic recovery is consumer confidence, right? Even during the pandemic and the health orders, we saw online shopping literally skyrocket. In fact, even before COVID, it was projected to double in 5 years. Well, the pace is much faster now, and all that is bodes well for the economy, right? And it's good for the supply chain. But to get to your questions, Council Member, the ships that are anchored today, depending on the vessel size, vessel type, and what specific terminal they're destined to, whether it's a terminal in Los Angeles or Long Beach, they can spend anywhere from 2 to 5 days at Anchorage. Ideally, the ideal situation is to get them from Anchorage to the terminal as quickly as possible. But again, a lot of that depends on the terminal they're destined to, how large the ship is, and the vessel type. With some terminals being able to accommodate larger ships, there's greater flexibility, but other terminals are not there yet. So those ships that are destined to those terminals, it means that ship may spend a little more time there. But the good news, as I mentioned, is that the trend line, look at ships at Anchorage, is moving in the right direction. So every day you see a downtick in the overall number of ships at Anchorage. And I think that will continue in the months ahead. Late spring, early summer is when we think you'll see that queue of ships dissipate. And it will also signal the fact that the broader supply chain and the congestion there is clearing up. As I said, one of the major factors in having these ships at Anchorage is because the warehouses and the distribution centers are fully subscribed. So when you have tightened capacity there, it creates congestion upstream, and that's kind of where we're at right now. But again, the encouraging sign here is that our terminals are maximizing gate hours, so that actually enables them to be able to move more containers out through their gates as quickly as possible, and then that opens up more footprint. On your question of what we're doing, we've taken a couple of steps that I think is helping us. One is we work with our terminal operator to prioritize dual transactions. And that means that as containers are coming in, they're also leaving. And that balance is good for the terminal, but it also is good for the truck driver. The second thing, which is more impactful, is we made available 40 acres of land there within the port as a relief valve. And these 40 acres are a site that we call STORE, STOR. It stands for Overflow Resource. And what this allows is it allows containers that get discharged from the ship onto the terminal. This 40-acre site allows those terminals to move those containers out of that terminal more quickly. What that effectively does is that it makes more room at the terminal. So I can tell you that within days of opening that short-term overflow site, that place was, you saw thousands of containers move into that location. So it's worked very, very well. Obviously, we wish we had 400 acres instead of just 40, but this is a good test run, and it's a good showing of the heightened demand for something like that. And then the last thing I'll say is working with our terminals to keep our dock workers safe is so critical. Thankfully, our advocacy efforts up and down the state and across the country were effective. And thanks to the leadership of our city, our mayor, and you on the city council member, we were able to prioritize our waterfront workers to get the vaccination. And many of our dock workers are already getting vaccinated. So it's critical for the supply chain to keep them healthy and make sure that they're able to go to work every day.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
I actually have a couple, if you don't mind. And I don't want to preempt anybody. Ray is on screen, so you may have a question as well. But a couple questions. One, we hear about so much coming inbound from China, about what's the share of inbound activity that's coming from China, and what are some of the other countries that are the origin for what comes in through our port or the both ports? That's one question. And then you were talking about the trucks and the opportunity to double load. I forget exactly the term you use. Is technology helping to facilitate that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great questions, Robert. So on the question of our trade partners, so right now about 50% of our inbound cargo comes from China. 70% of our total business is with China. That encompasses inbound and outbound. China, far and away, is our largest trade partner, right? Numbers 2, 3, 4, 5. They have just a slither of what China has, but it's principally in Southeast Asia. So it's your Vietnams, it's your Thailands, it's also Japan and Korea. But again, China by itself controls the lion's share. And that's the reason why our volumes were whipsawed back in 2018, 2019, because the U.S.-China trade war had a disproportionate impact on our port, on our gateway, because we rely so heavily on the Trans-Pacific trade lane. But the last thing I'll say about that is what the unintended or perhaps inadvertent consequence of the U.S.-China trade war is that it accelerated a shift in manufacturing that was already in motion. And that is that as China's economy continues to grow, as our middle class continues to expand, labor becomes a little more costly. So countries in Southeast Asia, for some of these manufacturing firms, became a little more advantageous. So a lot of that manufacturing has been shifting to places like Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia. And so over time, that shift we expect will continue. On your question about technology, certainly at the ports, our terminal operators have been on the cutting edge. And you're absolutely right. The only way that they can manage and enhance dual transactions, which is where a truck drops off a container and picks an inbound container in the same transaction, that can only be accomplished through technology. And just to give you all an example, one of our terminal operators, Long Beach Container Terminal, also known as LBCT, they're already applying something we call an API. And what an API does basically is that it integrates the operating system of the terminal with the operating system of the trucking company. And that automates the whole process of booking a reservation, either for an inbound, outbound. And it also helps to accelerate dual transactions, right? So technology definitely plays a role there.
Is that like an Uber platform?
Yeah, sorta, yes. Without the Uber driver, but yes, because the driver's already there. Yes.
That's awesome. Thank you, Robert. Those were great questions. I really appreciate it. Also, I saw the amazing Ray Lawson get on this. Can you give me a virtual high five right here? Give it up. There we go. All right. Good to see you, my friend.
Hi, Cindy. Hello, everyone. My question, Noel, would be to the tankers that come in from China. Would that cause like air quality pollution controls issues? Will it increase? Will it decrease? And South Coast AQMD, how will we deal with that in the future with the increase in goods coming in from those areas?
Yeah, Ray, first of all, welcome to the chat room. Excellent question. One that's Councilmember Allen alluded to earlier. You know, the good thing about the Port of Long Beach is, you know, we're a leader, right? We were the first green port dating back to 2005 with our innovative at the time green port policies. And the funny thing is that when you meet other port authorities across the country now, more and more are viewing themselves as the green port. And I like to remind them we were the first, right? These days there are over 100, but we were the first. And every year, you know, we've sort of, raised the bar. Some of you are familiar with our Clean Air Action Plan, which has a goal of zero emissions cargo handling equipment by 2030 and zero emissions trucks by 2035. And so, Ray, that gives you a sense of where we are when it comes to emissions control. I think the ports in Southern California have done a masterful job at increasing our business while reducing emissions. And the byproduct of that, Ray, is that other ports in the U.S. and even outside the U.S. are now adopting similar policies. That over time is going to help ports even in China adapt to the new reality of sustainability. Over the long haul, we expect that will be the case. The trends that started here in Long Beach will have ripple effects across the globe. But in the near term, what we're doing, thanks to AQMD and California Air Resources Board, is some of the rules that they're putting into place is tightening some of these requirements as it relates to ships. So for example, in California, a ship has an 80% requirement to connect to shore power. That means that when a ship is at berth, it has to connect. Either that or use an alternative technology that's approved by CARB. So these are some of the ways, Ray, that what we're doing as a port authority, what AQMD and what CARB are doing as regulators, this is how we're protecting, sort of, if you will, that fence line, right, to make sure that we're controlling emissions at every opportunity that we get while growing business.
Okay. Yes, wonderful. That partnership of the environment and industry is sometimes it can be tough to juggle it and balance it, but you guys seem to have a plan and work in that plan.
Thank you, Ray. And you know, it is tough. You know, it's a very, very hard balancing act, but so far, our cargo volumes, I think, show that we've been able to manage it pretty well.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. And Mr. Frank, were you able to get that working? No, we still can't hear you. I'm sorry. If you want to, you could also, if you have any questions, you also type that into the chat. If you go ahead, Robert. Did you have a?
Well, you know, I'm enjoying the questions, and of course, I have an endless number of questions that I'd like to throw Noel's way. So
Okay.
I'm going to ask one more if there's nobody else, and that's so the tenor with respect to our international trade is likely to change in the coming years with the change in the administration. If I'm not mistaken, I heard recently that some of the tariffs that were imposed in the United Kingdom have been rolled back, and I haven't really heard what's happened with the tariffs that have been applied to China's imports, nor their tariffs that they've applied. But once, if some of those tariffs are lifted, then what's already going to be a boom period, presumably for the ports, will probably even escalate. How do you figure all that in?
Well, the short answer is yes, right? And any time the door opens for us to receive more cargo volume, Robert, we certainly welcome it. I agree with you. I think the new administration is going to take a different approach as it relates to trade generally, and you've already begun to see that with some of their positions on some of our other partners in the UK, et cetera. I think with China, that process may roll out in time. And the reason for that is because our relationship with China is not just economic, it's very much political. And to give you an example, just yesterday, the Commerce Department announced that they were not lifting a tariff on Chinese manufactured chassis, right? And so I think that the administration is going to, which by the way is good for US made chassis, right? And I think what's going to happen is the administration is going to they're going to take a more holistic and more comprehensive look at their trade policies with China, because they want to avoid the whipsaw that we saw back in 2018, 2019. Now, having said that, I think the administration is going to pursue trade policies that are more favorable for the U.S. exporter, more favorable for the consumer that enjoys buying goods that are lower cost, right, Ray? I mean, I'll tell you, I mean, when we go to Target, we go to Walmart, and we go to Home Depot, we don't even think about where these goods are made, right? We see the label that says made in China, made in Taiwan, made in this other country, but we don't think about it most times, how it gets here and how it's manufactured. But I think over time, we'll get there. But what's going to be interesting, Robert, to your point about the correlation between trade policy and volunteer is how manufacturers in general are going to respond, because the U.S.-China trade war of 2018, 2019, I think had an effect in shifting some manufacturing already, right? And depending on how fast that shift happens, that could possibly impact how those goods enter the country, right? The demarcation line that the shipping lines use in deciding whether they send goods to the West Coast or to the East Coast historically has been Hong Kong. But if that shifts to, for example, Singapore, that may open the possibility of shifting more goods through New York, New Jersey, for example, right? So that's something we're tracking very closely. But generally, yes, I agree with you that the new administration is going to take a new look at trade policy, and we're optimistic that it's going to be more favorable.
Perfect.
Very good.
All right. Well, very good. Well, I am sorry to say, but we are at the end of this breakout session. I just want to extend an amazing thank you to our host for being here and for all of your thoughtful questions. And just stay in touch with the Long Beach Economic Partnership as we all work together in this economic recovery. So thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the day. Appreciate seeing everyone.
Thank you all very much. Take care.
Thanks, Cindy. Thanks, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Cindy. Thanks, everyone.